Here on our channel, people's stories come to life. Stories from different eras, professions, and destinies. Each of them follows their own path, their own life woven from circumstances, challenges, and choices. Before we step into their world, make sure to subscribe, and later, share your impressions in the comments. Now, let's begin. Some stories don't start with loud events. They start small, with details, with moments that seem insignificant, yet hold entire worlds within them. These are stories about people who never chose to be heroes. They simply lived, worked, made mistakes, learned from them, and kept moving forward. The lives of such people unfold like a slowly blooming flower, each petal revealing itself in its own time, each layer hiding new secrets, new pains, new joys. This is a story from a time when the world was just a little different. The boy's fingers were too small for the work, but they never trembled. That was the first thing Herman Voigt noticed. Not the poverty written in threadbare sleeves, not the hunger sharpening those young cheekbones, but the steadiness, a rare gift in hands so slight. Minneapolis smelled of flour and sawdust in those years. The mills along St. Anthony Falls ran day and night, their great wheels churning the Mississippi into profit for men who lived far from the river's spray. The boy lived close enough to hear the waters roar through thin walls, close enough that flour dust settled on everything his mother owned, which was little enough to count. His father worked the lumber mills, came home with shoulders bent and fingers stiff, speaking German in a city increasingly suspicious of anything foreign. The war was on, men marching south, while others made fortunes on timber and grain. The boy understood early that some people shaped the world, while others were shaped by it, and that his family belonged firmly to the latter group. He fixed things. A broken toy horse, its legs snapped clean, he whittled a splint from kindling and bound it with thread stolen from his mother's sewing basket. A neighbor's door latch that would not catch. He studied how the metal tongue should meet the strike plate, bent it with pliers until the mechanism married perfectly. These small victories against entropy brought him a pleasure he could not name. The pocket watch came to him by way of death. An uncle, his mother's brother, who had worked the docks in New York before consumption hollowed him out. The man left almost nothing, but there was this watch. Silver case, tarnished dark, the crystal cracked across its face. It no longer ticked. His mother would have sold it for a few coins, but the boy asked to keep it. She studied his face, saw something there that reminded her of her brother before the city broke him, and relented. He kept the watch under his mattress, taking it out when the house slept. By candlelight, he examined every surface, intuiting purpose in curves and notches. The case opened with gentle pressure at a specific point. Inside, a universe of tiny wheels and springs lay frozen in mechanical death. He did not know their names, escapement, mainspring, balance wheel, but he understood they were meant to dance together in precise rhythm. For months, he only looked. Then, one evening, with a bent pin and patience that would have unsettled anyone watching, he began to clean. Dried oil had become glue, holding everything captive. He scraped and wiped with cloth torn from his own shirt. A spring came loose in his palm, deadly and delicate. He nearly cried, thinking he had destroyed rather than repaired. But he set the spring aside and continued. Winter came hard that year. His sister, Anna, 3 years younger, developed a cough that frightened their mother. Medicine cost money they did not have. The boy took work where he found it, sweeping shop floors, hauling firewood, running messages through streets rutted with frozen mud. His hands grew rough, but they never lost their steadiness. On a March morning when he was 12, the watch ticked. Just once, as if clearing its throat after a long sleep. He had reassembled everything by touch and instinct, wound the crown, and held his breath. That single tick contained more satisfaction than any he had known. By evening, it ticked steadily, keeping time that was only minutes off true. He had resurrected something from silence. Herman Voigt's shop stood on Hennepin Avenue, wedged between a tobacconist and a dry goods store. The sign above the door showed a painted pocket watch, gold hands pointing eternally toward 2 o'clock. The boy had passed it countless times, always slowing to peer through the window at the workbench visible within, the rows of tools gleaming like surgical instruments. The elderly man bent over his work, with a jeweler's loop screwed into one eye socket. He brought the restored watch one April afternoon, not to sell, but to show. Pride was a luxury his station did not permit, yet he felt it burning in his chest. The bell above the door announced him. Herman Voigt looked up, old eyes sharp behind thick spectacles, taking in the patched coat and worn boots in an instant. The boy placed the watch on the counter without speaking. Voigt picked it up, his expression unreadable. He opened the case, examined the movement, closed it, opened it again. Minutes passed. The boy's courage began to fail. Then the old man looked at him directly. "Who did this work?" "I did, sir." "You cleaned this movement, reassembled it?" "Yes, sir." "What tools did you use? A bent pin? A rag?" "My fingers." Voigt was silent for a long moment. Outside, a wagon clattered past. Somewhere in the shop's interior, a clock chimed the quarter hour. "What is your name?" he told him. Voigt nodded slowly, as if confirming something with himself. "Can you read?" "Yes, sir. English and German, both." "Your hands. Show me." He held them out, palms up, then down. Voigt examined them as he had the watch, noting the steadiness, the calluses, the surprising cleanliness given the boy's obvious poverty. "I am too old to work alone anymore," Voigt said finally. "I need an apprentice. The pay is almost nothing for the first year. You will sweep floors, clean tools, run errands. If you prove capable, I will teach you the trade. It takes 7 years to make a watchmaker. Most boys lack the patience. Do you have patience?" The boy thought of the months spent studying the dead watch, the hours of careful cleaning, the moment of resurrection. "Yes, sir." "Come tomorrow at dawn." We will see if that is true. His mother wept when he told her, though whether from relief or fear he could not tell. An apprenticeship was a door out of the mills, away from the lumber dust that killed men slowly. But it was also 7 years of near poverty while his labor earned another man's profit. His father said nothing, but placed one heavy hand on his son's head for a moment before turning away. The workshop became his world. He learned the names of things, the clicking of the escapement, the breathing of the balance wheel, the singing of the mainspring under tension. Voigt was a demanding teacher, quick to point out errors, but generous with explanation. Each watch was a puzzle with only one correct solution. Patience was not optional. It was the foundation of everything. Voigt spoke sometimes of his own apprenticeship in Switzerland, of guild standards and master craftsmen, of a world where precision was worshipped like a god. He had left that world for reasons he never fully explained, arriving in Minnesota when it was barely organized territory. He had watched Minneapolis grow from muddy settlement to ambitious city, had repaired watches for lumber barons and confidence men, for steamboat captains and prostitutes, for everyone who needed to measure the hours they were given. "Time is the only thing distributed fairly," Voigt said once, his loupe catching lamplight. "Rich and poor, we each receive the same allotment each day. What we do with it reveals who we are." The boy, becoming a young man now, shoulders broadening, voice deepening, absorbed these lessons alongside the mechanical ones. He learned that a watch was not merely gears and springs, but a philosophical statement about order, about human desire to capture and control something fundamentally wild. He learned that people trusted watchmakers with intimate objects, carried close to the heart, and that this trust was sacred. Anna grew tall and determined, teaching herself letters from borrowed books, dreaming of schools and classrooms. Their father grew slower, his cough worsening. Their mother's hands became permanently red from washing other people's laundry. The boy gave them what little wages he earned, but mostly he gave them hope that he was learning something valuable, becoming something more than muscle for hire. At 17, Voigt allowed him to complete his first full repair alone, a merchant's pocket watch with a broken mainspring. He worked through the night, every movement deliberate, every decision weighed. When the watch ticked steadily at dawn, keeping perfect time, Voigt examined it thoroughly and nodded once. It was the highest praise the old man gave. The city outside continued its transformation. Buildings rose higher. Electric lights appeared on major streets, shocking and magical. The war ended, leaving different scars than those it began with. Immigrants arrived in waves, Scandinavians, Germans, Poles, seeking the promise of flour mills and timber. The divide between those who owned and those who worked grew wider, more visible, impossible to ignore. He understood by then that he occupied a strange middle space, not quite laborer, not quite gentleman, but a craftsman whose skill gave him value beyond the strength of his back. It was a precarious position, dependent on steady hands and steady reputation. He learned to be careful around men of power, agreeable but not servile, competent but not threatening. The workshop at dusk, lamps lit against the gathering dark, tools arranged in perfect order, the chorus of ticking from a dozen repaired timepieces awaiting collection. This became his sanctuary. Here, at least, mechanisms were honest. They worked or they did not. Their failures could be diagnosed, their problems solved with patience and precision. If only the larger world operated by such clear principles. But it did not, and he was learning that too. Hermann Voigt died on a Tuesday in October, collapsing at his workbench with a half-assembled chronograph still cradled in his palm. The young man found him there at dawn, already cold, the workshop silent, except for the mechanical chorus that never ceased its counting. He was 21 years old, and suddenly alone, with a lease, a reputation, and tools he had not yet earned the right to call his own. The funeral was small. Voigt had outlived most of his generation, and watchmakers were solitary creatures by nature. A few regular customers attended, nodding respectfully at the apprentice who was no longer an apprentice. The old man had left no family, no will, only an understanding with the landlord that the shop might continue under new hands if those hands proved worthy. Worthy meant paying rent. It meant maintaining the collecta ledger, the careful records of repairs promised and completed. It meant stepping into a role he had observed but never inhabited, the man behind the counter, the face of reliability, the keeper of other people's time. The first months were lean. Some customers remained loyal, trusting the training they had witnessed over years. Others drifted away, seeking established names, uncertain about youth and inexperience. He learned to project confidence he did not always feel, to quote prices that covered both materials and the hours of painstaking labor, to turn away work that exceeded his current skill rather than fail publicly. Minneapolis was changing faster now. The 1870s brought railroad expansion, grain speculation, fortunes made on paper and land. The city's wealth concentrated in new mansions along the lakes, while the mill districts grew more crowded, more desperate. He occupied the middle ground, serving both worlds but belonging fully to neither. His parents had aged badly. His father could no longer work the mills, his lungs finally surrendering to years of sawdust. Anna, now 16 and fierce with purpose, had found work teaching at a church school for immigrant children. She brought home stories of families even poorer than theirs had been, children who spoke no English, mothers who sewed until their eyes failed. The young watchmaker helped when he could, quiet payments that kept his parents housed and fed, that bought Anna books for her students. He developed a reputation for fairness. Working men brought him their cheap pocket watches, the kind that broke easily and meant everything to someone who needed to catch the morning shift. He charged them what they could afford, sometimes less. Wealthy clients brought complicated pieces, Swiss movements with moon phases and perpetual calendars, and he charged them properly, adding a small premium for their arrogance when they made him wait while discussing business they assumed he could not understand. His humor emerged in these years, dry and observational. A lawyer who complained about a 2-day repair while wearing a watch worth 6 months of a mill worker's wages. A banker's wife who insisted her timepiece ran slow when it kept perfect time. She simply could not accept how quickly her afternoons disappeared. He learned to smile politely while thinking thoughts that would have shocked them. The bakery stood 3 doors down, run by a German family named Schmidt. Their daughter Greta brought bread to the shop each morning, still warm, yeasty smell filling the workshop like a benediction. She was practical and plain-spoken, with strong arms from kneading dough and eyes that missed nothing. Their courtship consisted of brief exchanges during her deliveries, conversation measured in minutes accumulated over months. "Your clock is 3 minutes fast," she said one morning, nodding toward the wall regulator. "No, the church bell is 3 minutes slow." Confident. Precise. There is a difference. She smiled at that, a quick flash that transformed her serious face. Precision in a man is either very good or very tiresome. "Which do you think?" "I have not decided yet." But she kept coming, and their conversations lengthened by increments. She asked about his work. He asked about bread. Ridiculous topics that meant everything because they were exchanged. He learned she read philosophy, borrowing books from the library, hungry for ideas the way others were hungry for food. She learned he saw the world as a mechanism that could be understood if examined carefully enough. Their engagement was practical, negotiated between families with little money but strong mutual respect. The wedding was modest, held in the same church where Anna taught, followed by a dinner of the Schmidt's best bread and the watchmaker's carefully saved wine. Greta moved into the apartment above the shop, bringing almost nothing but herself, which was everything.
Marriage settled into comfortable rhythm. She managed accounts with a skill that shamed his previous attempts, organizing the ledger so he could see at a glance which customers paid promptly and which required gentle reminders. She brought steady income from her own baking, sold to neighbors and boarding houses. Their evenings were quiet, him at the workbench catching up on repairs, her reading by lamplight, occasional conversation drifting between them like music. "A man came today asking about you," she said one winter night. "What man?" "Rich, expensive coat. Asked if you were reliable." "What did you tell him?" "That you were expensive, but worth it." He laughed. "I am not expensive." "You should be. You undercharge the wealthy and overwork for the poor." "The poor need their watches repaired too." "Yes, but they do not tip their hats to you on the street. They do not remember your name at city functions. You are building the wrong kind of reputation." She was right, as usual. He began adjusting his prices, not dramatically, but deliberately. Word spread that the watchmaker on Hennepin Avenue did quality work, charged fairly, and maintained absolute discretion. That last quality proved valuable. Wealthy men carried expensive watches, and expensive watches sometimes needed repair at odd hours, brought in with whispered requests for quick service and no questions. He learned the city's secret geography, who drank too much and pawned their timepieces on Monday, who kept mistresses and needed alibis confirmed by appointment books, who gambled and lost and needed their grandfather's watch back before the family noticed. He kept these secrets as carefully as he maintained his tools, understanding that discretion was its own form of currency. Cornelius Ashford first appeared on a Thursday in spring, bringing a railroad watch that needed regulation. He was a grain merchant, grown wealthy on Minneapolis's transformation into a milling capital, a man who wore his success like armor. He spoke to the watchmaker the way one might speak to a moderately intelligent dog. Clear, simple sentences, no expectation of meaningful response. "I need this by Saturday." "It will be ready Monday." "I said Saturday." "And I said Monday. The work required cannot be rushed without risking damage." Ashford's face darkened. He was not accustomed to refusal, especially from tradesmen. But he needed the repair, and something in the young watchmaker's calm refusal suggested immovability. "Monday, then. Early." By noon. The watch was ready by Monday noon, regulated perfectly, cleaned and oiled. Ashford examined it, found no fault, paid the quoted price without the tip he likely gave to more obsequious craftsmen. But he returned, again and again over the following years, bringing increasingly complicated pieces, testing the watchmaker's skill with difficult repairs. They never became friendly. Ashford treated him with the distant courtesy afforded to useful servants. The watchmaker responded with professional competence and nothing more. He had learned caution around powerful men, understanding that they noticed those who made themselves too familiar, just as surely as they dismissed those who were too servile. Better to be competent and forgettable. Anna announced her engagement to a schoolmaster, a serious young man who shared her passion for education. The watchmaker gave them what money he could spare for a simple wedding, grateful that his sister had found someone who valued her mind as much as her devotion. His parents attended, his father frail now, coughing through the ceremony, but present and proud. The city continued its relentless expansion.
Telephones appeared in wealthy homes, connecting voices across impossible distances. Electric streetcars replaced horse-drawn omnibuses. The gap between rich and poor widened with each technological advance, each new fortune built on grain futures and railroad speculation. The watchmaker repaired timepieces for both worlds, his workshop a neutral territory where mechanisms mattered more than money. Greta became pregnant in their third year of marriage. The news arrived quietly, confirmed by the doctor who lived above the butcher shop, a man the watchmaker had repaired a watch for in exchange for medical services. She continued working through the early months, her practicality refusing to acknowledge discomfort as reason for rest. At night, lying in their small bed above the ticking shop, she would place his hand on her belly to feel the child moving. Life assembling itself from invisible components, growing toward completion according to laws more mysterious than any he worked with. He felt terrified and grateful in equal measure, wondering what kind of world this child would inherit. What mechanisms of power and justice would shape their existence? The workshop at midnight, a single lamp burning, movements in various states of repair spread across his bench, Greta asleep upstairs, their child growing in darkness toward light. This was his life now, modest and sufficient. He had built something from almost nothing, mastered a craft that gave him purpose and income, married a woman who balanced his weaknesses with her strengths. If he never became wealthy or influential, at least he would never return to the poverty that had shaped his childhood. He did not yet understand that comfort was its own form of danger, that the most devastating mechanisms were often those you never saw winding. The watch arrived on a Monday in late September, carried in Cornelius Ashford's hand like something precious and dangerous at once. The watchmaker noticed immediately that something was wrong, not with the timepiece, though that too would prove true, but with the man himself. Ashford's usual arrogance had been replaced by something harder to name. Agitation, perhaps, or fear poorly disguised as impatience. "This needs your attention," Ashford said, placing the watch on the counter with uncharacteristic care. It was an extraordinary piece, Swiss-made, gold case elaborately engraved with scenes of classical mythology, the kind of watch that cost more than most families earned in a year. The watchmaker opened the case, examined the movement. Complications everywhere: moon phase, perpetual calendar, chronograph function. And something else, something his trained ear caught immediately. The ticking was irregular, almost imperceptibly so, a slight hesitation in the escapement's rhythm that spoke of either damage or deliberate alteration. "What needs repair?" "The timing is off. It runs slow." "I need it corrected before the 23rd. That was oddly specific. The watchmaker made a note in his ledger, quoted a price that Ashford accepted without his usual attempt at negotiation. Another unusual sign. Wealthy men haggled from habit, from the pleasure of asserting dominance over tradesmen. Ashford simply agreed and turned to leave. "The 23rd is 3 weeks away. I can have this ready in 10 days. "The 23rd, Ashford repeated, and something in his voice suggested the date carried significance beyond mere preference. Then he was gone, the bell above the door marking his departure. The watchmaker set the piece aside for more urgent work, but his mind returned to it throughout the day.
That irregular tick bothered him the way a misaligned mechanism bothered him, the way anything imperfect bothered him. By evening, after Greta had gone to bed, she tired easily now, their son growing heavy inside her. He brought the watch to his bench for closer examination. The movement was masterwork, assembled by someone who understood precision as philosophy. Yet that hesitation persisted, a tiny stumble in the balance wheel's oscillation. He disassembled it carefully, laying out components in precise order. Everything appeared correct. Jeweled bearings clean, mainspring properly tensioned, escapement undamaged. He cleaned and oiled it anyway, reassembled it with the patience of 7 years' training. The irregular tick remained. Frustration was rare for him, but he felt it now. He held the watch close, listening to that subtle imperfection, trying to diagnose a problem that should not exist. Then, turning the case in lamplight, he noticed something, a hairline discontinuity in the interior surface, barely visible even under magnification. His pulse quickened slightly, the way it always did when a mechanism revealed its secrets reluctantly. He pressed gently at various points along the discontinuity. Nothing. He tried different pressures, different angles. Then, almost accidentally, he wound the crown counterclockwise exactly 3 turns while pressing a small indentation near the hinge. Something clicked. A hidden compartment, no larger than a postage stamp, sprang open in the case's double wall. Inside lay a folded piece of paper, tissue-thin, and a tiny key, brass with an unusual cut pattern. His hands remained steady as he unfolded the paper under his jeweler's loop. Numbers written in pencil, columns of them, and initials. Some kind of code or account. Meaningless to him, but clearly important to someone. The key bore no markings, offered no clue to what lock it might open. He sat motionless for several minutes, weighing options. This was not his business. Wealthy men kept secrets. Wise craftsmen did not investigate them. The prudent course was obvious. Close the compartment, complete the repair, return the watch, forget what he had seen. He had a pregnant wife, elderly parents depending on his support, a reputation built on discretion. Curiosity was a luxury he could not afford. Yet he found himself carefully refolding the paper, returning it and the key to their hiding place, closing the compartment. The irregular tick, he realized now, was intentional, a signal to someone who knew what to listen for, a mechanical code saying there is more here than meets the eye. 3 days passed. The 23rd approached. Ashford did not return as scheduled. The watchmaker completed other repairs, served other customers, but found his attention drifting repeatedly to the gold watch sitting in his repair cabinet. Greta noticed his distraction. "What troubles you?" "A repair that will not resolve correctly." She knew him well enough to hear the lie in that, but she also knew when to press and when to wait. She placed a hand on her swollen belly and said nothing more. On the morning of the 23rd, the city woke to startling news. Cornelius Ashford had vanished. Left his mansion on Hennepin Avenue the previous evening, telling his household staff he was meeting business associates downtown. Never arrived at the supposed meeting. Never returned home. His carriage found abandoned near the warehouse district. Driver nowhere to be found either. The watchmaker read the newspaper account 3 times, a cold sensation spreading through his chest. He went to his cabinet, removed the gold watch, held it in his palm. It ticked irregularly, keeping its secret, waiting for someone who would never return to claim it. By afternoon, 2 police officers arrived at his shop. Routine inquiries, they explained. Mr. Ashford's household staff had mentioned a recent visit to a watchmaker. Had he been here? When? Did he seem unusual in any way? The watchmaker answered carefully, truthfully. Yes, Ashford had brought a watch for repair, about 3 weeks ago. He seemed perhaps more rushed than usual, but nothing alarming. The watch was still here, unclaimed. Would they like to see it? They examined it briefly, without interest. Just a watch. They thanked him for his cooperation and left. The bell above the door seemed to ring with unusual finality. He should have given them the watch then. Should have mentioned the hidden compartment, the paper, the key. But something stopped him, some compound of caution and curiosity that he would later recognize as the first step into territory far more dangerous than he understood. He told himself he was simply being prudent, waiting to see what developed. In truth, he had already decided to look deeper, though he would not admit this even to himself. That evening, alone in the workshop after Greta had retired, he opened the compartment again, studied the numbers more carefully. They appeared to be dates and amounts, perhaps financial records. The initials recurred in patterns: C.A., which would be Ashford himself, and V.H., and R.K., and several others he did not recognize. The tiny key lay in his palm like a question. What lock had Ashford wanted opened? What door closed? And why hide it all in a watch brought to a craftsman who was supposed to be invisible, beneath notice, safe precisely because he was beneath suspicion? He realized, sitting there with the lamplight throwing shadows across his workbench, that he had stumbled into machinery far more complex than any watch movement. There were gears here he could not see, forces he did not understand, and consequences he could not predict. The sensible course was still available. Return the watch to police, claim ignorance, retreat into the safety of his narrow craftsman's life. But Greta was pregnant. His son, he felt certain it would be a son, would be born into a world where men like Ashford vanished, where power operated by mechanisms hidden from ordinary view, where justice was a luxury distributed as unevenly as wealth. Old Voigt had taught him that time was distributed fairly, but he had learned since that everything else was rigged, weighted, corrupted by those who understood the hidden compartments. The watch ticked on, irregular and insistent. Outside, the city continued its evening routines, unaware that one of its prominent citizens had disappeared, unaware that a watchmaker sat in a pool of lamplight holding secrets he had not asked for and could not easily return. The mechanism had engaged. Events would unfold according to laws he did not yet understand. He closed the compartment carefully, returned the watch to its case, and sat listening to the chorus of timepieces around him. The grandfather clock in the corner, the wall regulator above his bench, the pocket watches awaiting collection. All of them keeping honest time, marking the passage of moments toward whatever future he had just set in motion. Sleep would not come easily tonight. Upstairs, Greta breathed in the rhythm of pregnancy, their child swimming in darkness toward light. Down here, he had chosen something without quite choosing it, stepped forward without quite moving. The watch in its case, the key in its hidden chamber, the questions multiplying like clockwork complications, each answer revealing 3 new mysteries. 23 days. Ashford had specified the 23rd. Whatever he had planned, whatever machinery he had set in motion, its timing had been precise. But something had interrupted the mechanism. Someone had stopped the watch before it could complete its intended function. The watchmaker sat in his workshop, surrounded by the tools of his trade, and understood that he had become part of something far larger than a simple repair. The ticking continued, irregular and knowing, counting down toward consequences he could not yet name. The child arrived during the first snow of November, a son as the watchmaker had somehow known. They named him Peter, after Greta's father, and the infant's cries joined the chorus of ticking that filled the apartment. Life and time, measured in different rhythms, both relentless and demanding. For 2 weeks, the watchmaker existed in the fog of new fatherhood. Sleepless nights, the weight of responsibility made flesh, the strange terror of holding something so fragile in his calloused hands. The Ashford matter receded temporarily, though the gold watch remained hidden in his repair cabinet, waiting like an unexploded mechanism. The police investigation stalled quickly. Rich men sometimes fled bad debts or angry wives or business complications. Without a body, without evidence of foul play, the matter gradually faded from newspaper headlines. Life resumed its surface normalcy. Only the watchmaker knew that beneath the calm, gears were still turning. Victor Halstead appeared on a gray December morning, introduced himself as Ashford's business partner. He was younger than Ashford had been, dressed with similar expensive attention to detail. But his eyes moved constantly, assessing, calculating. A predator's eyes, the watchmaker thought, though he kept his face professionally neutral. "I understand Cornelius brought a watch here before his disappearance." "Yes, for repair. It remains unclaimed. I would like to retrieve it on behalf of his estate." The watchmaker felt his heartbeat accelerate slightly, though his hands remained steady. "The police have been informed. If they authorize release, I will of course comply." Halstead's smile did not reach those restless eyes. "Surely that is unnecessary for a simple watch repair. I will pay whatever he owed, plus compensation for your trouble." "I appreciate that, but I must follow proper procedures." The smile vanished. "How much did Ashford pay you?" "I do not discuss clients' business." "He is not your client anymore. He is likely dead." "Then his estate will settle the account through appropriate channels." They regarded each other across the counter. 2 men negotiating a conversation that was not really about a watch at all. Halstead finally nodded slowly. "You are cautious. That is wise. I will obtain the necessary authorization." After he left, the watchmaker locked the door and leaned against it, breathing carefully. Greta appeared at the top of the stairs, holding Peter against her shoulder. "Who was that man?" "Someone asking about Ashford's watch." "Will you give it to him?" "Not yet." She studied him with the same careful attention she gave to her account books. "You found something in that watch, did not you?" There was no point in lying to her. He nodded. "Show me." He brought the watch upstairs, demonstrated the hidden compartment, showed her the paper and key. She read the numbers, her expression growing more serious. "These look like financial records, dates and amounts, large amounts." "What do you think they mean?" "Nothing good. Men do not hide records unless they are hiding crimes." Should I give it to the police? And tell them what? That you have been concealing evidence for weeks? That you opened a client's watch without permission? They might arrest you as an accomplice. She was right. His silence had already implicated him. The safe course had closed like a door weeks ago. Then what do I do? You learn what these numbers mean before someone kills you for them. Her bluntness shocked him. She saw his expression and softened slightly. You have a son now. Whatever you do, think of him first. But thinking of Peter was what drove him forward. What world was this child inheriting? One where powerful men vanished and no one demanded answers? Where justice was a mechanism wound selectively, measuring time only for those who could afford watches? He began his investigation the way he approached complicated repairs, methodically, patiently, one component at a time. His position gave him unusual access. Wealthy men brought him their timepieces and spoke freely in his presence, forgetting or dismissing his ability to understand. They discussed business, politics, scandals, assuming a craftsman's ears were merely decorative. He listened now, with new attention. Ashford's name appeared in conversations like a ghost. Railroad investments, they said. Land speculation near the planned northern routes. Partnerships with city officials who could influence right-of-way decisions. Money borrowed from small investors promised guaranteed returns. The watchmaker began to see the pattern. The dates on the hidden paper corresponded to public announcements of railroad developments. The amounts matched investment pools mentioned in newspapers. The initials, he recognized VH as almost certainly Victor Halstead, and one of the others matched a city councilman who had been particularly vocal about supporting northern expansion. A scheme, then, but what kind? He needed someone who understood finance, who could interpret the numbers properly. His own expertise ended with mechanical systems. Fortune arrived in the form of a banker named Morrison, who brought a complicated pocket watch for repair. The watchmaker had serviced his timepieces before. Morrison was precise, honest by banker standards, uncomfortable with the corruption that infected Minneapolis business circles. While examining the watchmaker asked casual questions about railroad investments, about how such ventures were structured. Morrison, pleased to find a craftsman interested in finance, explained willingly. Investment pools, he said, where multiple small investors contributed funds managed by a promoter. The promoter used the money to secure land, bribe officials, position for profit when routes were announced. Legal, mostly, if the promised returns materialized. And if they did not materialize, then investors lost their money, and promoters vanished, usually to somewhere without extradition treaties. Has this happened recently? Morrison hesitated, then lowered his voice. There are rumors about some of Ashford's ventures. Investors expected returns by October. Nothing arrived. Then Ashford disappeared. Some people believe he took their money and fled. Others think his partners murdered him to avoid repayment. The watchmaker's hands continued their work on the watch movement, steady despite the acceleration of his pulse. What do you think happened? I think powerful men rarely face consequences. One way or another, small investors will lose everything, and whoever survives will grow wealthier. That night, the watchmaker compared Morrison's explanation to the hidden records. The pattern became clearer. Ashford had been collecting investor money for railroad ventures that would never materialize. The routes had been planned elsewhere, the bribes paid to officials who then betrayed him. Halstead and the others had structured the fraud, so Ashford carried all legal risk. When he discovered the betrayal, he must have gathered evidence, hidden it in the watch, planned to expose them. Before he could, they had stopped him. Permanently, most likely.
The tiny key remained mysterious until a casual comment from another customer, a lawyer's clerk, mentioned that Ashford had kept a safe deposit box at First National Bank. The watchmaker examined the key again under magnification. It matched the general pattern of safe deposit keys he had seen before. He was now in possession of evidence that could destroy powerful men, locked inside a mechanism they did not know existed. The question was, what to do with it? Going to the police meant risking his own arrest, or worse, alerting Halstead that the evidence survived. But staying silent meant letting fraud and possibly murder go unpunished. Peter's cries interrupted his thoughts. Greta brought the baby downstairs, settling into the chair near his workbench to nurse. The domesticity of the scene contrasted sharply with the dangerous knowledge that surrounded them. "You have decided something," she said quietly. "I have decided I need to know what is in that safe deposit box. That is theft. It is investigation. It is dangerous. Everything is dangerous now, even doing nothing." She was silent for a long moment, Peter's small sounds filling the space. Finally, she nodded. "Then be clever about it, and do not trust anyone, especially not the police." Winter deepened. The watchmaker continued his careful observation, his systematic gathering of information. He learned which officials had received bribes, which investors had been defrauded. The amounts were staggering. Hundreds of families had lost their savings, their futures, while men like Halstead grew wealthier. One night in January, his workshop window shattered. No one outside, no note, just broken glass scattered across his workbench. A warning, crude but effective. They knew he had something, even if they did not know exactly what. Greta found him sweeping glass in the pre-dawn darkness. She said nothing, just placed a hand on his shoulder. They both understood. The mechanism had engaged completely now. Events would run their course according to their own logic, driven by forces he had set in motion, but could no longer control. The gold watch ticked irregularly in its hiding place, keeping imperfect time, counting down toward revelations that would either bring justice or destroy everything he had built. Outside, the city slept under fresh snow, beautiful and indifferent. Inside, a craftsman who had wanted only to repair timepieces found himself disassembling a far more complicated mechanism. One built of greed and betrayal and murder. One whose springs, when released, might destroy him, along with everything else. Spring arrived, reluctantly, ice breaking on the river in great groaning sheets, the city emerging from winter like a patient from fever. Peter grew, his cries becoming more purposeful, his eyes beginning to focus and recognize. The watchmaker found himself memorizing the child's face during sleepless nights, as if preparing for the possibility that he might not see him grow older. The safe deposit box demanded action.
Weeks of observation had taught him the bank's rhythms, when clerks changed shifts, when the vault room was busiest and therefore most chaotic, when attention might be diverted by the ordinary press of commerce. He was not a thief by nature or training, but 7 years of watchmaking had taught him that complex mechanisms could be understood, their weak points identified, their security defeated by patience and precision. He needed a reason to be at the bank. Morrison, the banker, provided it unwittingly, mentioning that the institution was seeking someone to service the large wall clock in the main hall. The timepiece had been running slow for months, annoying customers and staff alike. The watchmaker submitted a bid, modest enough to be accepted, high enough not to arouse suspicion. On a Tuesday in March, he arrived with his tool case and a letter of authorization. The clock required legitimate work. Its pendulum needed adjustment, the escapement cleaning. He performed the repair carefully, taking longer than strictly necessary, observing the vault room's operations through the reflection in the clock's glass case. Safe deposit access required 2 keys, the customer's and a master held by vault clerks. Customers signed a register, were escorted to private viewing rooms, and left alone with their boxes. The system assumed honesty from those holding customer keys. It did not anticipate someone possessing both technical skill and stolen access. The watchmaker worked on the clock for 3 days, establishing his presence as routine. On the 4th day, he brought the tiny brass key in his vest pocket, his heart beating faster than it had since childhood. He completed the clock repair, received payment, thanked the manager. Then he paused at the door, patted his pockets with theatrical concern. "My good pen! I must have left it by the clock." The manager waved him back impatiently. The watchmaker returned to the main hall, made a show of searching, then drifted casually toward the vault corridor. A clerk emerged carrying ledgers, preoccupied. The watchmaker slipped past into the restricted area, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged. The viewing room stood empty this late in the afternoon. He entered one, closed the door, forced himself to breathe normally. The boxes lined the walls in numbered precision. He had learned Ashford's box number from the lawyer's clerk, 379. He found it on the 3rd wall, waist height. The tiny key slid into the lock smoothly, turned with barely a whisper. The mechanism was quality work, German probably, precise and reliable. The box slid free. He carried it to the small table, opened it with hands that wanted to tremble but did not. Documents. Dozens of them. Letters, contracts, account ledgers. Everything carefully organized as if Ashford had been preparing evidence for trial. The watchmaker's trained eye quickly sorted them by category. Here were investment agreements, showing money collected from hundreds of small investors, widows, shopkeepers, working men who had scraped together savings, hoping for security in old age. Here were letters proving the railroad routes had been changed through bribery, that Halstead and the city councilman had deliberately sabotaged Ashford's ventures while keeping the investment money. Here were threats, increasingly explicit, demanding Ashford's silence and cooperation in declaring the ventures failed through legitimate bad luck. The final document was a letter in Ashford's hand, addressed to the newspapers, explaining everything. He had dated it for the 23rd, the day he vanished. He had planned to expose the entire scheme, had hidden the evidence here, had concealed the key in the watch as insurance. Someone had stopped him, hours before he could act. The watchmaker photographed everything mentally, his years of studying tiny mechanisms translating to rapid visual comprehension. Then he faced his dilemma. Taking the documents would alert Halstead that they had been found, might trigger immediate violence. Leaving them meant they could be destroyed if Halstead discovered their location. He chose a middle path. He copied key pages in his notebook, returning the originals to careful order. The complete evidence remained safe, but he now possessed enough information to prove the fraud if the originals vanished. It was not perfect, but perfection was a luxury unavailable in mechanisms this corrupted. Returning the box took steady nerves. He relocked it, wiped the key clean, slipped back into the main hall as staff prepared to close. No one had noticed his absence. No one suspected that the invisible craftsman had just stolen knowledge worth more than anything in the vault. Walking home through the spring evening, he felt the weight of what he carried, not in his tool case, but in his mind. This knowledge could restore fortunes to defrauded investors, could bring justice to Ashford's probable murder, could remove corrupt men from power. It could also get him killed, destroy his family, accomplish nothing if powerful men closed ranks to protect themselves. Greta took one look at his face and sent Peter to her mother for the night. Alone in their apartment above the shop, he told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her practical mind already calculating consequences and possibilities. "You cannot go to the police. Half of them are on Halstead's payroll." "I know." "You cannot publish this yourself." "You have no proof they will believe, and they will simply call you a lying tradesman with delusions." "I know that too." "Then what?" He had been thinking about this during the long walk home. There is a newspaper editor, Jacobson, who publishes reform pieces. He has exposed corruption before, carefully, with multiple sources. If I could provide him information anonymously, along with directions to the safe deposit box, he could verify everything, publish with legal protection I do not have. "And if Halstead traces it back to you anyway?" "Then I need insurance. Multiple copies of my notes, held by trusted people, with instructions to release them if anything happens to me, a mechanism that protects itself." She considered this, her fingers drumming on the table in a rhythm that reminded him of clockwork. "Who do you trust that much?" "Morrison, the banker. Anna and her husband in Chicago. You." "Not enough. You need someone with power, someone Halstead fears." She was right. He needed someone positioned to act if the mechanism failed, someone whose mere involvement would deter violence. But who among the powerful could be trusted when power itself seemed to corrupt uniformly? The answer came from an unexpected source. A judge named Thornton brought a pocket watch for repair the following week. A conscientious man known for harsh sentences against corruption. During the repair consultation, the watchmaker took a calculated risk. "Your Honor, if someone possessed evidence of serious fraud, but feared for their safety in reporting it, what would you advise?" Thornton studied him with sharp interest. "I would advise them to document everything, secure the evidence in multiple locations, and approach someone with both legal standing and physical protection to investigate on their behalf." "Someone like yourself, perhaps?" "That would depend on the nature and credibility of the evidence." The watchmaker made his decision. I would like to discuss a hypothetical case involving railroad investment fraud, Your Honor. Purely hypothetically, of course. What followed was a careful dance of revelation without explicit admission. The judge was no fool. He understood immediately that the hypothesis was concrete reality, but he also understood the danger. By the end of their conversation, they had an agreement. The watchmaker would provide detailed information and evidence location. Thornton would investigate quietly, building a legal case solid enough to survive the political pressure that would inevitably arrive. "You understand you are risking everything," Thornton said finally. "I understand I am risking nothing compared to the people who have already lost everything." The mechanism was now fully constructed. Copies of his notes went to Morrison, to Anna in Chicago, to Judge Thornton, and to Jacobson, the newspaper editor. Detailed instructions explained how to access the safe deposit box evidence. Each recipient knew only their part, protected by limited knowledge. If the watchmaker died or disappeared, the mechanism would trigger automatically, releasing information that would destroy Halstead and his associates. Halstead made his move in late April. He appeared at the workshop after hours, accompanied by two men whose occupation was obvious from their scarred knuckles and dead eyes. The watchmaker was alone, Greta having taken Peter to visit her parents. "You have something that belongs to me." "I repair watches. If you have brought one, I am happy to provide service." "Do not be clever. Ashford's watch. I know it contains more than gears." The watchmaker had prepared for this moment, rehearsed his response until it sounded spontaneous. "The watch was claimed last month. A man with proper authorization from the estate." Halstead's expression darkened. "You are lying." "If you believe so, search the shop. You will find nothing." The two men moved forward, but Halstead stopped them with a gesture. Something in the watchmaker's calm had unsettled him, suggested preparation rather than fear. "You think you are protected. You are not. You are a tradesman, playing games with forces you cannot comprehend." "I comprehend that you are in my shop without invitation, making threats I should report to police." "The police work for me." "Not all of them." Halstead studied him for a long moment. The watchmaker kept his hands steady, his expression neutral, projecting confidence he did not entirely feel. Finally, Halstead nodded slowly. "You have made a serious mistake. Whatever you think you know, whatever you think you have arranged, it will not protect you. Perhaps, but it will certainly destroy you if anything happens to me or my family." The words hung in the air between them, an explicit threat disguised as observation. Halstead's eyes narrowed, understanding that the craftsman had indeed built something, some mechanism of retaliation, whose full shape remained hidden. "We will see," he said finally, and left with his men. The watchmaker locked the door behind them, sat down at his workbench, and allowed himself to shake. Greta returned an hour later, found him still sitting there, staring at nothing. "It has begun," he said quietly. She nodded, set Peter in his cradle, came to stand beside him. "Then we see it through." Outside, the spring evening deepened toward night. The shop's clocks ticked in their various rhythms, measuring time that suddenly felt both precious and uncertain. The watchmaker had set forces in motion that would either bring justice or destruction. The mechanism was wound, the balance wheel oscillating, the escapement releasing moment by moment toward consequences he could only hope to survive. The days that followed crawled by, tense and uncertain, as if the city itself were holding its breath. The watchmaker could feel it, in the cautious way customers spoke to him, in the sudden quiet that fell when certain names were mentioned, in the new habit of looking twice before locking his door each night. Greta pretended calm, but he saw the tension in how she counted the day's receipts, how often she paused to listen for footsteps outside. The shop had become their fortress, the upper floor their refuge, and beneath the ticking of clocks, they both felt the weight of waiting. Then, in late May, the first blow landed. The newspaper Jacobson edited published an unsigned exposé. It laid out, in cautious but unmistakable detail, the fraudulent structure of the railroad investment pools. It did not name Halstead outright, but it referred to a prominent financier with political ties, and missing funds linked to a vanished business partner. The article mentioned that certain documents in safe deposit number 379 had confirmed suspicions. The watchmaker read it 3 times, his pulse thrumming as steadily as any of the clocks surrounding him. The mechanism had begun to move. The reaction was swift. The city council erupted in denials, the bank issued statements about confidentiality, and investors flooded offices demanding restitution. Rumors spread like frost. Ashford's body had been found. Ashford had fled to Canada. Ashford had left behind notes naming his betrayers. Every story contradicted the next, and yet the truth flickered among them like light through fog. Victor Halstead vanished from public view for several days. But when he reappeared, it was not in disgrace. He hosted an extravagant dinner at his mansion on the southern edge of town, attended by half the city's elite. A performance of calm, a show of untouchable power. 2 nights later, the watchmaker returned home to find his workshop door ajar. Nothing taken, nothing broken. But his apprentice, an eager, solemn boy he had taken on only months before, stood pale and trembling beside the counter. "2 men came asking for you," he said. "They wanted to know where you live. I told them you lived above the shop. One of them said I was a smart boy." The boy swallowed. I did not like how he said it. The watchmaker gave him extra pay and sent him home for 2 weeks. He spent the evening reinforcing locks, checking hiding places. Greta said little. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, steady, more frightening than panic. "You must decide if this fight is worth our lives." He looked at her across the table where their accounts and copied documents lay stacked in careful rows. "It is not a fight anymore," he said. "It is simply the end of what has been set in motion." They both knew what that meant. Once wound, a mechanism released its stored energy until spent. There were no pauses, no reversals, only the ticking toward conclusion. He met Judge Thornton secretly 2 days later at a tavern on the edge of the river district. The judge looked older, his face drawn, his manner cautious. "I cannot protect you much longer," Thornton said, leaning close. "Halstead's influence extends further than I expected. The police commissioner himself has financial ties to him. But I do have one thing, a warrant. Limited, preliminary, but sufficient to seize the contents of the safety deposit box. It must be executed tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" "Yes. Quietly. Early morning. A single officer I trust will be present. If what we find is as damning as your notes suggest, it will move swiftly from there." The watchmaker nodded. "I can provide testimony if needed. Do so carefully." Men like Halstead, they do not go quietly. The next morning dawned cold and clear, the spring sun glinting off wet roofs. The watchmaker walked to the bank just before opening, heart heavy as lead. Inside, the vault stood open, clerks milling nervously, an officer and Thornton already present. The judge nodded for him to approach. "You may witness as the informant." The officer inserted the master key. The watchmaker fitted the tiny brass one. Together they turned. The box slid free. Thornton opened it carefully and froze. Empty. Every document, every letter, gone. The judge's face tightened. Someone knew. Halstead. It had to be. The betrayal was complete. And yet the mechanism had one reserve spring still wound. The banker Morrison, the copied notes, the others who held fragments of knowledge, each link was another tick toward inevitable exposure. That evening, the city's quiet broke. Jacobson's second article appeared. This one named names. It published excerpts from what he called copies of confidential documents, describing how Ashford's murder had been covered up, where bribes had gone, how Halstead and his allies had divided the spoils. The tone was measured, the evidence undeniable. The editors had waited until the first legal proceedings could begin before publication. Halstead's fall began that night. Yet victory brought no relief. The watchmaker went to bed late, Greta's hand within his own, both too tired to speak. Sometime in the dark hours, glass shattered below. He sprang up, heart hammering, two silhouettes at the workbench, faint lamplight glinting off metal. He grabbed the small pistol Thornton had insisted he keep, awkward in his hands, unnatural but necessary, and descended with as much steadiness as fear allowed. One man turned at the sound. The other moved too quickly. A flash, a shout, the smell of smoke and oil. Then silence, thick and absolute. When it was over, one man lay groaning near the counter. The other fleeing into the alley beyond the open door. The watchmaker's hands shook, but his aim had been true enough. The councilman named in the article was arrested the next morning alongside Halstead. The confession from the wounded man, Halstead's hired enforcer, linked them both to Ashford's disappearance. The location of the body followed within a day, a shallow grave near the abandoned railway depot. Halstead denied everything, of course. He accused others, blamed rivals, protested he had no reason to harm his partner. But the papers, the testimony, and the deathbed confession of one accomplice left him with no escape. The city buzzed with talk of retribution, reform, and justice, though each word meant something different to each mouth that spoke it. Through all of it, the watchmaker refused recognition. His name appeared nowhere in the papers. Judge Thornton shielded his involvement. Morrison handled his affairs quietly, and Greta burned every remaining paper that might link them to the case. In the shop's quiet, surrounded by the rhythm of repaired timepieces, he let exhaustion settle. Peter laughed for the first time that week, a clear, untroubled sound, and it pierced the fog of fatigue like light through soot. Greta poured coffee, handed him a cup still steaming. "Do you think it is finished?" He watched the thin trail of smoke rising between them. Mechanisms stop when their energy is gone, but men rebuild them. She smiled faintly. then perhaps make better ones next time. For days he repaired nothing. The shop became a sanctuary again, cleansed by silence, by familiarity. When he finally reopened, people came hesitantly, curious to see if the craftsman still worked, if the clocks still ran. They did. He fixed them all, one by one, never once mentioning the gold watch hidden now in a drawer beneath velvet cloth. It ticked perfectly, the irregular beat gone. A week later, Judge Thornton visited in plain clothes, his expression softer. "It is done," the judge said quietly. "Halstead and his allies will stand trial. The city will claim it seeks reform, though I doubt it will last. You did more good than you may realize." "I repaired what I could," the watchmaker replied. Thornton smiled, almost sadly. That is what justice always is, a repair job after something breaks. When he was gone, the watchmaker went upstairs, found Greta rocking Peter beside the window. The evening light poured in golden across her hair. The streets below full of life again, vendors shouting, wheels clattering, the hum of a city returning to routine. He touched the child's small hand, felt its warmth, marveled again at the mystery of something living and unharmed in a world built on fragile mechanisms. Outside, the bells struck the hour. Inside, every clock answered in chorus, steady, precise, alive. The sound filled the room, not as measure of time, but as proof that harmony, once lost, could be restored, at least for a moment. The watchmaker closed his eyes, listening. Time would keep moving, always slightly irregular, but now it seemed like music rather than judgment, a rhythm he could bear to follow. The city exhaled at last. Summer came warm and abundant, washing clean the streets that had seen so much anger. Yet beneath the new vitality, a faint malaise lingered, as though people were uncertain whether to celebrate or distrust their own return to ordinary life. Minneapolis went on breathing, as all cities do. But its rhythm was slightly altered, its tick corrected, but never quite the same. The watchmaker resumed his routine. With the trials begun, most of the danger had passed, leaving only a quiet exhaustion that clung to him long after the newspapers stopped printing his anxiety. Some mornings he woke still expecting to hear breaking glass or footsteps on the stair, only to find sunlight through lace curtains and the familiar scent of Greta's bread baking below. Work returned, slowly at first, then steadily. The prosperous men who had once looked past him now sought his services again, some out of guilt, others from the comfort of repaired clocks that ignored human folly. He charged fairly, though never forgot which of them had tried to cheat him in the leaner days. His prices for them were precise, never vengeful, but not forgiving either. Those who had truly suffered found a quieter welcome. Farmers whose savings had vanished through Ashford's false shares came to him too, not for pity, but for minuscule repairs, clocks cracked, watches inherited and left silent for years. He restored them all, taking payment when they insisted, refusing it when they could not. Word of that discretion spread more enduringly than rumors of scandal. Judge Thornton visited from time to time, no longer as the crusading figure who had confronted corruption, but as an aging man with tired eyes and a touch of melancholy. "You know," he said once, leaning against the workshop wall, "there are new Halsteads already. Different names, same ambitions. The machinery runs forever." "Then we oil it when we can," replied the watchmaker, not without irony. "Or stop it for a moment if we must." Thornton smiled. "And afterward?" "Afterward, we listen. A clock that stops can be restarted only if its maker listens first." He had thought often about that, how every mechanism carried the history of its failure inside it. People did too. The temptation to forget was strong, but forgetting meant turning away from the very gear that had once jammed. He preferred to keep it visible, as warning and as proof of what could be mended. Greta, busy with the children, now 2 after their daughter Lydia was born that spring, found happiness in small patterns: baking, teaching the boy letters, mending shirts. Their evenings followed a rhythm as steady as the clocks downstairs. After supper, she read aloud from the day's paper while he sorted parts, or wound the shelf clocks, or simply watched the lamplight tremble on polished brass. The world outside could rage or calm at will. Within these few rooms, peace had its own logic. One evening, as dusk crept in pink over the river, a young man knocked, thin, nervous, carrying a watch wrapped in handkerchief. "My father said you fixed his when he had nothing to pay with," the stranger explained. "He passed last month. I thought you should have this." The watch was ordinary, cheap metal, scratched and scarred. The hands were bent slightly, its case dented, its glass long replaced. Inside, though, the movement was perfect, one of the watchmaker's own repairs from years before. He remembered the case, a mill worker's piece, traded one winter night for a loaf of Greta's bread. "Your father was a good man," he said, handing a few coins back with the repaired watch. "Keep it. Let it tell you when to stop working and go home. That is the only hour that matters." The boy smiled awkwardly and left, and for a long while the watchmaker sat staring at the door. He realized then how the work, once only craft, had grown into something else, a witness to time, not as measure, but as memory. Each mended piece carried echoes of the hands that had touched it, the moments it had marked. Collect enough of them, and you heard the heartbeat of a whole city. The apprentice he had taken before Halstead's threats returned by midsummer, more serious now, as though instinctively aware that this shop was no longer merely a place of learning, but a vessel of quiet history. The boy's questions were endless. Why one spring yielded the right tension? Why another failed, if cut a breath too short? "Because every balance demands respect," the watchmaker told him. "If you force it, you break it. Patience is the only precision." It was what Voigt had told him once, in that first cramped workshop years ago. He caught himself repeating the old man's tone exactly. The recognition warmed him like an old melody returning after silence. Greta teased him for his solemnity. "You speak to that apprentice the way ministers talk to congregations. Will he leave understanding watchmaking or theology?" "Both, perhaps," he said. "Time is just faith with gears." Yet the world outside their narrow street moved onward. The city grew wealthier. The mills roared at night. Men built houses of brick where clapboard had stood. Streetcars clanged past the shop front, their electric hum replacing horse hooves. Progress measured itself in speed. Only inside the watchmaker's domain did time slow to its proper beat. Sometimes, customers from the new generation entered, sons of the men who had once conspired with Halstead. They spoke differently, moved more confidently, waved away old scandals as if history were dust. He repaired their watches as well, though quietly wished they might one day sense the echo inside each tick, the fragile equilibrium between order and collapse. By autumn, Peter was nearly walking, Lydia already learning to laugh. Their lives revolved around patterns Greta called good monotony. work, meals, the small triumphs of children learning the length of hours. The watchmaker found comfort in it, yet also an unease he could not name, a sense that a long chapter had closed and another waited patiently beyond the horizon. One evening, as leaves fell in russet drifts outside and Greta folded laundry by lamplight, the apprentice asked about the golden watch, the one kept locked away, almost mythic.
"It belonged to a man who taught me how dangerous time can be," the watchmaker said, "and how much it costs to change its direction. Will you sell it someday? No. Some clocks belong to the story, not the trade." The boy nodded, perhaps not fully understanding, but respectful of mysteries that adults carried like unspoken oaths. The season turned cold again, snow fell, muffling the city's clangor. In the evenings, the family gathered close to the stove while the workshop below filled with the slow heartbeat of hundreds of clocks. Sometimes the watchmaker would pause mid-work, closing his eyes to that rhythm. It no longer sounded threatening or exacting. Instead, it seemed compassionate, as though each mechanism were keeping watch, ensuring that no moment passed entirely unnoticed. He had learned in these years that justice rarely stayed permanent, that comfort was always temporary, and that human hearts, like watch springs, could bear only so much tension before needing release. But he had also learned to repair even that. When winter deepened, he sent his apprentice to deliver finished pieces to customers too aged or ill to come themselves. The boy returned each time with coins and stories, and sometimes with gratitude small enough to seem invisible, until you counted how those gestures accumulated, like seconds, into minutes. The trial finally ended in late February. Halstead was sentenced to long years in prison, though rumors said he would never serve them all. The city called it justice. The watchmaker refused to read the coverage. He needed no confirmation. Instead, he watched Peter at the window tracing frost on the glass, Greta humming as she worked, and felt an unfamiliar lightness. Things repaired often carried faint scars, but they endured. Perhaps the world, for all its crooked gears, could endure as well. When spring returned again, he finished adjusting a delicate escapement and noticed his reflection in the glass of the cabinet. Older, grayer, but calm. The workshop smelled of brass and oil and bread from downstairs. Outside, children shouted in the street. The clocks ticked in soft communion with the world beyond their walls. And for the first time in many years, their rhythm matched his heart exactly. Rain fell lightly over Hennepin Avenue, carrying the scent of wet dust and lilac into the early summer air. The watchmaker stood within his workshop, hands steady as he wound a long case clock recently restored, a commission from a family whose name lined the city's better newspapers. The mechanism rang clear when he tested it, deep and resonant, as though a cathedral had lent its voice to the humble room. He would be 39 by year's turn, though years mattered less to him now. He measured time in other ways, in Peter's laughter echoing up the stairwell when the boy darted between errands, in Lydia's patient curiosity as she handed him screws too small for her fingers, in Greta's quiet steps descending each evening with tea and the day's calm folded around her like a shawl. The shop had changed subtly. Its shelves were fuller, its tools better arranged. The faint aroma of oil and brass mingled with something domestic, bread crusts cooling, lilacs from the small vase Greta insisted on keeping near the register. A clockmaker's world, yes, but no longer solely his own. The rhythm of family had woven itself into the delicate chorus of ticking. He told himself the city around them had healed, though he knew that was only partly true. Minneapolis bustled, prosperous again, rails extending westward like veins. Yet under the prosperity pulsed the same human frailties, corruption softened into custom, ambition disguised as progress. He accepted it with weary understanding. One could not repair the whole. One could only keep the gears honest within reach. Late in the afternoons, when light slanted across the workshop floor like strands of gold, he allowed Peter to tinker under supervision. The boy, now 6, had inherited both dexterity and curiosity. Lydia sat near them, quietly sorting screws by size, her small concentration an anchor in the room. Occasionally, Greta came down with letters from Anna, who still taught in Chicago. Anna's handwriting had grown surer, her tone lighter. She wrote of her students, children of immigrants, clever and stubborn, and of her small house near the lake. Her words carried pride in her brother without naming what precisely made her proud. He wrote back, sparingly, but always enclosed a pressed wildflower or a neatly drafted sketch of some new escapement design, small tokens more intimate than confession. One morning, a well-dressed stranger entered the shop carrying a travel-worn trunk. He introduced himself as an apprentice of Herman Voigt's nephew, visiting from St. Louis. With him, he brought an old watch, a model Voigt himself had once assembled in his early years. "It bears his mark," the young man said, carefully revealing the initials inside the case. "I was told you trained under him." The sight of the mark stirred something deep in the watchmaker. The engraving was faint, nearly rubbed smooth, but the letters were unmistakable. He examined the piece as reverently as a relic. The mechanism needed cleaning. Its mainspring was almost broken. He promised to restore it, refusing extra payment. After the visitor left, he sat motionless for several minutes, the watch open on the bench before him. Age had blackened its plates. Oil had hardened into flakes. Still, when he touched the balance wheel, it moved faintly, willing toward life. He thought about Voigt, his sharp voice, his rigid discipline, his unseen kindness, and realized with sudden clarity that his own hands had become the same instruments of patience once offered to him. Time had turned full circle with quiet symmetry. When evening came, he spoke of it to Greta as they sat by the window. Outside, the city lights shimmered across puddled streets. "He taught me that a true craftsman begins every repair with humility. I never understood that until this year. Each thing I mend feels less like mastery and more like listening." She smiled, setting her teacup aside. "Then you are finally fluent in silence." "I suppose that is the only language time respects." On his workbench lay another familiar object, the golden watch that had once belonged to Cornelius Ashford. It rested now inside a modest glass case, its dial bright as the day it was made. He had never sold it, never once considered doing so. Its beat, once irregular, now marked perfect time. To any observer, it was just a beautiful piece. But for him, it was something else entirely. The bridge between chaos and order, a reminder that even through deceit, some precision might be reclaimed.
He kept it carefully wound, not out of superstition, but gratitude. Around it clustered the tools of his trade: fine screwdrivers, tweezers, small brushes. They were old companions, their handles worn smooth by years of use. When he lifted them, it felt as though every past moment guided his hand. The child repairing his uncle's dead watch, the youth learning under Voight's stern eye, the man caught between conscience and survival, and finally the father teaching his son the geometry of balance. By late summer, he had agreed to take a new apprentice, a neighbor's orphaned nephew, barely 14. Shy and thin, the boy worked hard, grateful for quiet instruction. It occurred to the watchmaker that this, too, was a circle closing, each generation acquiring steadiness from the last, adding its own small correction to the age-old mechanism. Sometimes on Sundays after church, he would walk with Greta and the children along the river. The skyline had changed. New factories, taller warehouses, smoke trailing into the blue. Yet at its heart, the city still carried traces of the older world. The cobbled lanes, the faint hum of water wheels beyond the modern turbines. He imagined Voight standing here decades earlier, seeing only promise. He wondered what Voight would think now of locomotives outpacing the rhythm of pocket watches, of clocks regulated by electricity rather than springs. "Will watches vanish someday?" Peter asked during one of these walks. "Perhaps," he said, "but time will still need listening to. Something must always mark its passing." Greta looked at him, amused. "Then we shall teach the next generation to listen too." Her words comforted him in ways he could not explain. The future no longer frightened him, as it once had. He saw it instead as a series of continuations, each fragile, each repaired by care and understanding, as all delicate things must be. When autumn returned, he finished Voight's old watch. It ticked faithfully again, precise and proud, bearing within it both the teacher's and the student's ghosts. He placed it beside Ashford's golden one. Two instruments so different, one humble, one opulent, and yet their ticking blended into a single, shared rhythm. That evening, he carried both upstairs. Peter and Lydia watched in quiet awe as he set them on the mantel, explaining that each had come from different times. Both survived through the same patience. The children nodded solemnly, though their understanding was still made of wonder rather than experience. After they were asleep, he stood by the window. Below, the street shimmered with lamplights and rain. He remembered Ashford's desperate eyes, Halstead's arrogance, Thornton's compassion, Greta's unyielding courage. Time had thinned them all into memory, yet memory remained the only truthful measure. He turned back to the two watches on the mantel, one gold, one steel. Their ticking mingled softly with the wind. More than any sermon or monument, they seemed to capture what mattered, that a life, if tended carefully, could keep honest time. Not flawless, but faithful. Greta joined him, slipping her arm through his. They stood together as the city hummed below, the sound of water and wheels merging with the uncountable ticks of clocks in windows and halls across Minneapolis. "Tomorrow is another workday," she said gently. He smiled. "Good. The world needs its repairs." Outside, the bells struck 9. Inside, every clock took up the echo and carried it forward. The hands moved without haste, the pendulum swung with quiet certainty, and the watchmaker's home, his circle of family, trade, and time, ticked in calm agreement with the living world. The evening deepened until the last sound was only the soft metronome of the golden watch, its steady pulse filling the silence. It beat as if the city itself slept within it, secure for now within the careful keeping of those who still believed that order, once lost, could be found again.